Do want to take you out to some breaking news right now involving former President Trump, as the judge has fined the former president $9,000 for violating a gag order a total of 9 times amid his, quote, hush money case and trial. Prosecutors did allege the former president violated the order, which bars him from making public statements about witnesses and jurors a total of 10 times, and the judge concurred in all but one of those cases. The judge will hold a hearing Thursday on 4 more alleged violations of the order. The ruling is a rebuke for the former president, who had insisted that he was exercising his free speech rights. The ruling came at the start of the second week of testimony in that historic trial, which did get underway moments ago here. Trump is back in that Manhattan criminal courthouse in New York City because the judge has ordered him to be there every day of the trial that could last for another 3 to 5 weeks. Trump faces 34 felony counts of falsifying business records.
All right, people, welcome back to Jack Mockler. Judge Merchan warned Trump in open court that jail is the next step if he continues violating court orders after finding him in contempt 9 separate times. The sitting president was told that fines and warnings have failed and that actual jail sanctions are now on the table, a historic moment in American legal history. But before we get into the jaw-dropping details of that moment, we need to understand the backstory. Because this didn't happen in a vacuum. This was the culmination of weeks of deliberate, repeated, and frankly defiant behavior by Trump. The gag order that Merchan issued at the start of the trial was not some sweeping censorship of everything Trump wanted to say. It was targeted and specific. It covered jurors, witnesses, court staff, and the families of those people.
And the charges stem from alleged hush money payments made to prevent stories from surfacing in the final days of his 2016 presidential campaign. That does include payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels. This is the first criminal trial of any former U.S. president and is also the first of 4 indictments against Trump expected to go to trial. Last week, David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, testified that he pledged to be Trump's eyes and ears during the presidential campaign. Pecker did recount how he promised Trump that he would help suppress harmful stories and even arranged to purchase the silence of a doorman. Now, again, that ruling coming down moments ago as the judge has now fined former President Trump $9,000 for violating that gag order a total of 9 times amid his hush money case and trial that is now officially back underway for the day. We did hear from the former president as he was entering into the courtroom moments ago. Very short comments in nature, but I do want to pop up the audio here and listen in.
It was designed to protect ordinary citizens who were doing their civic duty from being targeted, harassed, or intimidated by the most followed political figure in the country. Think about what it means to be a juror in a Trump trial. You're just a regular person trying to do the right thing. You show up, you listen to the evidence, you try to be fair, and then suddenly your name, your face, your background is being discussed by millions of people who are emotionally invested in the outcome. That's an enormous amount of pressure. That's the kind of thing that could make anyone afraid to do their job. And that's exactly what the gag order was designed to prevent. So Merchan started finding Trump in contempt. The maximum fine under New York law is $1,000 per violation. So Merchan fined Trump $1,000, then another $1,000, then another.
Icebox for 8 hours, 9 hours or so. They took me off the campaign trail, but the good news is my poll numbers are the highest they've ever been, so at least we're getting the word out. And everybody knows this trial is a scam. It's a scam. The judge should be recused, and he should recuse himself today. It's the most recusable judge I've been. It's called recusal abuse. And he should recuse himself today. And maybe he will. Maybe he will. Maybe he'll do the right thing. But really, more importantly than the recusal, he should terminate the case today. The judge should terminate the case because they have no case. As Jonathan Turley said, as all of them said, every single one of them, Dershowitz, McCarthy, everyone, Greg Jarrett, Mark Levin, they all said this case should be ended immediately. This case is over. It should be ended immediately. And many of them are not fans of mine. but they want to do the right thing for the country. So I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much. And I'm going to go into the icebox now and sit for about 8 hours or 9 hours. I'd much rather be in Georgia. I'd much rather be in Florida. I'd much rather be in states that are...
By the time we got to the 9th violation, Trump had accumulated $9,000 in fines. Now think about that number for a second. $9,000 to a man who is worth billions. $9,000 to someone who raises tens of millions of dollars with a single fundraising email. $9,000 is absolutely nothing to Donald Trump. It's a rounding error. It's the kind of money his team probably spends on lunch in a single day. And Merchan knew that. He acknowledged it in his rulings. He said, essentially, I know these fines aren't working. I know this amount of money means nothing to you. But it's the maximum the law allows me to impose. So I'm imposing it, and I'm building a record that will justify the next step if you keep doing this.
The former president's hush money criminal trial, week 3 of proceedings, week 2 of the prosecution's case. Today on a social network, Trump reposted a clip of Senator Lindsey Graham telling CNN's Dana Bash that all the Trump trials are political and, in the senator's words, selective prosecution. Just ahead tonight, we're going to hear from a group of undecided women voters in the key state of North Carolina and get their take on this trial. But first, CNN's Kara Scannell joins us with what we can expect for tomorrow. So who's starting on the stand tomorrow, and do we know who's next?
So on the stand tomorrow will still be Michael Cohen's banker. He started testifying on Friday, and he was beginning to give the jury a sense of the documents in this case because, as he testified, Michael Cohen was in a hurry to set up bank accounts for 2 shell companies. One of those companies, Essential Consultants, is the one that ultimately paid the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels, the hush money. So tomorrow I expect the jury will see these wire transfers, and it will give them a sense of how this happened, all before Michael Cohen is even called to the witness stand, but setting up some of the documents in this case. And there is a period in this trial, this is about falsified documents, where we're going to have to see.
And Trump kept doing it. He kept posting. He kept attacking. He kept targeting the very people the gag order was designed to protect. He pushed and pushed and pushed, daring the judge to do something about it. And that's when the dynamic shifted. That's when Merchan's language started to change. On the day of the 9th contempt finding, Merchan issued a written ruling that included something you don't often see from a judge in a case like this. He wrote that the court would not tolerate continued willful violations, and then he added that if Trump kept breaking the gag order, the court would impose an incarceratory punishment if necessary. Incarceratory punishment.
Some documents and not the sort of narrative testimony that we got from David Pecker.
And the idea that this was rushed is important for the prosecution to kind of show that the urgency of it before the election.
Exactly. The first one that Michael Cohen was setting up was to handle the reimbursement to AMI for paying Karen McDougal. Ultimately, AMI called it off and said they didn't want to do the reimbursement. The second one was for the Stormy Daniels payment. And we've seen the creation of these companies through the documents on Friday, and now we'll get the sense of the money trail from here.
I want to bring in also former federal prosecutor, CNN senior legal analyst Ellie Honig, and best-selling author Jeffrey Toobin. Jeff, who would you expect to take the stand next?
They are working up to Michael Cohen. I don't know if he will be next, but he will be soon. But this testimony, it's not the most thrilling stuff in the world to see the checks and the financial transactions put into evidence. But this is going to corroborate Michael Cohen. It's going to be very important testimony that the prosecution is going to say, look, Michael Cohen didn't invent these transactions. Here are...
That's a fancy legal term, but it means something very simple. It means jail. The judge put it in writing. Jail was on the table, and people noticed, but Trump kept going anyway. Now let's talk about what actually happened with the 10th violation, because that's where everything escalated to a completely different level. The gag order specifically covered jurors, witnesses, court staff, and their families. And Trump's 10th violation involved comments he made about the jurors, the people who were going to decide his fate. He made statements that were seen as targeting the jury with rhetoric that could pressure them, scare them, or make them feel like they were being watched and judged publicly. And that's a serious problem. The jury system relies on jurors being able to do their job without fear. It's a foundational principle of the American justice system. If defendants can publicly attack jurors during a trial, the whole system breaks down. Nobody would agree to serve. Nobody would feel safe doing their civic duty. And Merchan, who had been patient, who had been methodical, who had bent over backwards to avoid the appearance of political bias, had finally had enough. So on that day, Merchan found Trump in contempt for the 10th violation. And this time, he didn't just issue a fine or a written warning. He addressed Trump directly, in open court, out loud, on the record. He said he didn't want to jail the former and possibly future president. He acknowledged the unusual nature of the situation. He acknowledged that this wasn't a decision any judge would take lightly. But then he said something that became one of the most quoted lines from any proceeding in this entire case. He said, "At the end of the day, I have a job to do." And if fines weren't enough, he would have to consider a jail sanction. A jail sanction, said out loud by the judge in court to Trump's face. And even Merchan himself described it as his most serious warning yet. Not a routine contempt finding, not a procedural slap on the wrist, his most serious warning yet. This is genuinely historically wild. And what makes it even more remarkable is that Merchan is not the only judge who has gone down this road with Trump. Around the same time, Judge Arthur Engoron, who was overseeing Trump's separate civil fraud case in New York, also warned that future gag order violations in his courtroom could lead to more severe sanctions and possibly imprisonment. Engoron actually held Trump in contempt and fined him $5,000 for leaving up an attack on one of Engoron's law clerks. And he made clear that the escalation path, warning, fine, jail, was not just a threat, it was the actual legal framework in front of Trump. So now you have multiple judges in multiple cases in the same state, all saying the same thing to the same man. If you keep breaking the rules, prison is on the table. That's not a one-off. That's a pattern. And patterns matter in court. Now let's talk about Trump's reaction, because his reaction is exactly what you would expect from someone who genuinely doesn't believe the rules apply to him. After the jail threat from Merchan, Trump went on Truth Social and posted an attack on the judge. He called the trial the most biased and partisan he had ever seen. He attacked the prosecutors. And then he wrote, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Now he's threatening me with jail and they have no case." He actually posted that. He compared himself to a victim. He used the jail threat, a jail threat he brought entirely on himself through repeated violations of a court order, as a fundraising and outrage narrative. And then he deleted the post, which, by the way, is exactly the kind of behavior the gag order was designed to stop in the first place. Post something inflammatory, stir up your base, let the anger spread, then delete it before the judge can formally cite it as a violation. It's a pattern. It's deliberate. And it's exactly the kind of thing that got him into this mess in the first place. The stakes here are genuinely enormous, and I want you to understand why this matters so much beyond just the legal technicalities. We're not talking about some obscure legal dispute between high-powered lawyers. We're talking about a defendant in a criminal case who was given a clear, simple rule. Do not publicly attack the jurors and witnesses in your case. And who chose repeatedly and publicly to break that rule. And every time he broke it, there are real people on the other end. Real jurors who suddenly had their names and faces being discussed in connection with one of the most polarizing political figures in modern American history. Real witnesses who had to worry about their safety. Real court staff whose families were mentioned in the context of political attacks. Those are not abstractions. Those are people. And Merchan's job, the thing he kept coming back to in his rulings, was to protect those people. That's why the jail threat exists. Not to silence Trump, not to help the prosecution, to protect the people who are participating in a legal process that Trump is trying to undermine from the outside, even while he sits inside the courtroom. And here's what people are not fully grasping. Merchan is also the judge who is going to sentence Trump in the underlying case, the hush money conviction. He has the power to decide what happens to Trump at sentencing. And when Trump keeps attacking the process, keeps violating court orders, keeps posting and deleting and posting again, every single one of those choices is happening in front of the man who gets to decide Trump's legal fate. Every single one. And that's not a small thing. Judges are human beings. They're supposed to be impartial, but impartiality doesn't mean ignoring a defendant's behavior. A defendant who has been found in contempt 10 times is a defendant who has demonstrated something about how he views the court's authority. And judges notice that. It's not about being vindictive. It's about recognizing that someone who has shown repeated contempt for the court's authority might need a different kind of consequence than someone who made a one-time mistake. The contempt findings themselves are not just procedural speed bumps. They are a legal record. They are documented proof in a court of law that this defendant was given a clear instruction by a judge and chose to violate it repeatedly and willfully. Willfully is the key word. Merchan specifically used the word willful in his rulings. Not accidental, not a misunderstanding. Willful. That means Trump knew what the order said, knew he was violating it, and did it anyway. That's a big deal because willfulness goes to intent. It goes to whether someone respects the authority of the court. And in the context of a criminal case where the judge is also deciding the sentence, that record of willful contempt does not disappear. It sits in the file. It's part of the picture the judge is looking at when he decides what to do with this defendant. And right now, that picture is not great for Trump's side of the ledger. The jail threat is also bigger than most people are giving it credit for. When judges issue escalating warnings in contempt proceedings, they are not bluffing. They are building a legal record that justifies the next step. Every warning, every fine, every written ruling that Merchan issued was a brick in a wall that now says, "We tried everything else. We gave you every opportunity to comply. You refused. And now the court has no choice but to escalate." That's how contempt law works. You can't just skip to jail out of nowhere. You have to show the record. You have to show the escalation. And Merchan has done exactly that. He has built an airtight record of escalating consequences that would legally justify an incarceratory sanction if Trump violates the order again. He has done the legal groundwork. The next brick in that wall is a jail cell. And he basically said so out loud in court to Trump's face. Now, what actually happens if Merchan follows through? This is where it gets genuinely extraordinary because we are not talking about an ordinary defendant. We are talking about a former president of the United States, a man with a Secret Service detail, a man who lives in a world of privilege and protection that ordinary citizens cannot even imagine. What does it even look like to jail a former president for contempt? Honestly, nobody knows. It has never happened before. There would be immediate legal challenges. There would be constitutional questions about whether a former president can be jailed during the pendency of an appeal. The Secret Service would presumably argue about how to handle the logistics of presidential protection in a detention facility. It would be the most chaotic, legal, and political moment in modern American history. And yet Merchan said he would consider it. He said he has a job to do. He did not carve out an exception for presidents. He said the rules apply, and if the rules are not being followed, the consequences apply too. That is remarkable. That is a judge standing in the face of enormous political pressure and saying the law is the law. And here is the broader point that ties all of this together. What we are watching with the Merchan contempt saga is not just a legal story about one judge and one defendant. It is a test of the entire system. Because what Trump has been doing with his gag order violations is essentially a dare. He has been saying, "Fine me, I don't care. The fines are nothing. Your rules do not apply to me." And the question of whether any judge can actually enforce compliance on someone in Trump's position is a question about whether the rule of law means anything for everyone, or whether it only applies to people who do not have enough money, power, or followers to ignore it. Merchan's jail threat is an answer to that dare. It is a judge saying, actually, the rules do apply, and I am willing to be the one who enforces them, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is unprecedented, even when it will create a firestorm that consumes the entire news cycle. The law is the law. Sounds simple. But in this moment, in this case, with this defendant, it might be the most radical thing any American judge has said in a generation. And look, this is not just about the hush money case. This is about the broader pattern of behavior that Trump has displayed throughout his legal troubles. He has always treated the legal system as something that applies to other people. He has always believed that his money and power could protect him from consequences. He has always thought that he could say whatever he wanted, do whatever he wanted, and that nothing would ever happen to him. And for most of his life, he has been right. He has avoided consequences through delay, through legal maneuvering, through the sheer force of his personality and wealth. But now he is facing a judge who is not intimidated by him, a judge who is not impressed by his money, a judge who is not swayed by his political power, a judge who is simply doing his job and applying the law as it is written. That is something Trump has never really faced before, and he doesn't know how to handle it. The gag order violations also reveal something fundamental about Trump's character. He cannot help himself. He cannot stop talking. He cannot stop attacking, even when it is clearly against his own interests, even when his own lawyers are probably begging him to stop, even when a judge is telling him directly that the next step is jail. Trump keeps posting. He keeps attacking. He keeps daring the system to do something to him. It's like watching someone keep poking a bear even after the bear has growled and showed its teeth. At some point, the bear is going to swipe. And in this case, the bear is a federal judge who has made it very clear what happens next. Trump seems to genuinely believe that he is above the law, that the rules don't apply to him, that he can say and do whatever he wants without consequence. But Merchan is demonstrating that there are consequences, and they are getting more serious with every violation. Trump's lawyers are stuck in an impossible position, knowing his attacks and gag order violations make a jail sentence more likely, but unable to control his impulses. The constitutional implications are profound. The system is responding to a president who tests its limits, asserting that no one, not even a former president, is above the law. The political implications are equally significant. Trump has built his entire political identity around being a fighter, around refusing to back down, around attacking anyone who crosses him. His base loves that about him. They see his defiance of the legal system as proof that he is fighting for them, that he is challenging the establishment, that he is willing to take on the powerful forces that they believe are arrayed against them. But there is a difference between fighting for your supporters and breaking court orders. There is a difference between challenging the establishment and threatening the safety of jurors and witnesses. Trump's behavior is crossing lines that even many of his supporters might find troubling. And the jail threat from Merchan raises the stakes even higher. If Trump actually ends up in jail, that is not going to look like a fighter standing up to the system. That is going to look like a man who refused to follow the rules and finally faced the consequences. The media coverage of this story has also been fascinating to watch. Different outlets are covering it in very different ways, depending on their political orientation. Some are treating it as a shocking development that shows the system is finally holding Trump accountable. Others are treating it as evidence of a partisan judge trying to silence a political opponent. And still others are just trying to figure out what happens next because nobody really knows. But regardless of the political spin, the basic facts are indisputable. Trump was given a court order. Trump violated that court order 10 times. Trump was fined for those violations. Trump kept violating the order anyway. And now a judge has said that the next violation could result in jail. Those are the facts. How you interpret those facts depends on your political perspective. But the facts themselves are not in dispute. And here's the bottom line. Trump has been fined $9,000 for breaking a court order 10 times. $9,000 that he can pay without blinking. $9,000 that means absolutely nothing to someone in his financial position. And each time he paid it, he went right back online and did the exact same thing. So the fines did not work. The written warnings did not work. The escalating language in every subsequent court ruling did not work. And now a judge has said out loud on the record directly to his face in open court, the next stop is jail, not a fine, not a stronger fine, jail. And the whole country is watching to see what happens next. Because this is the moment where the story stops being about filings and motions and legal strategy. This is the moment where it becomes about something much more fundamental. Whether a man who has spent his entire life using money and power to avoid consequences is finally going to run into a consequence he cannot post his way out of. Whether the system bends or holds. Merchan warned and Trump kept posting. At some point, something has to give. And in this case, that something might be the most powerful man in the world finally finding out that the rules were never optional. They were always mandatory. They just needed someone with the backbone to enforce them. And that someone might be a judge from New York named Juan Merchan, who looked at a former president and said, "At the end of the day, I have a job to do." That's what this moment is really about. Not Trump, not politics, not the spectacle. It's about whether the rule of law still means something, whether a judge can enforce a court order against a powerful defendant, whether the system can hold when it is tested. And right now, the system is being tested like never before, and the judge is holding firm. So where does this go from here? Trump has been convicted in the underlying case. Sentencing is pending. Merchan still has to decide what to do with the conviction. And Trump's legal team is doing everything they can to delay, appeal, and maneuver. But the contempt record is already there. It is already built. And if Trump makes one more move that Merchan determines crosses the line, one more post, one more statement, one more attack on a juror or a witness or a court staffer, the judge has now made it very clear what the next step looks like. It will not be a $1,000 fine. It will be a conversation about jail, a real conversation with real consequences. And the country will have to watch and decide what it thinks about a justice system that either enforces its own rules equally or does not. That is the story. That is what is actually at stake here. Not the politics, not the fundraising emails, not the Truth Social posts. The question of whether the law applies to everyone, including him. Trump's legal team is terrified because their client is his own worst enemy, continuing to attack and violate court orders despite the judge's explicit jail threat. If Judge Merchan follows through, it will be an unprecedented moment affirming that the rule of law still applies to the powerful, and the country may soon have to confront what happens when a former president actually goes to jail.